You have to find the sur or the tal of the emotion that conversation requires of you and who you need to be in that conversation. That emotional self-regulation is very challenging, yet I think meaningful work, and most of one's personal growth as being a founder and CEO comes from actually that, navigating that landscape. And my last urge for people who've been underwhelmed or disillusioned or disappointed by the online learning experience as parents, or as students themselves in schools and colleges over the last 18 months, my appeal to them is always that I say that, listen, we're in the black and white era of, what the black and white era of television was, and that's the stage we're at in online learning. It's going to improve. We will get to IMAX 4D, and we'll get to IMAX 4D faster than black and white television got to IMAX 4D as a viewing experience.
Hey listeners, new year, new set of guests. We have heard about SpaceX, 10X, and here was somebody who wanted India X. Joining me, a special guest who is on a vision or a mission to build high quality, global and modern online venture. What is it? What did it take to get there? What are some of the trails of this journey? Is what our special guest is going to share with us in this podcast. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome Shreyasi on the show. Shreyasi, thank you for joining Inspire Someone today.
Thank you so much, Shrikant, for having me. Looking forward to this conversation. I love the title, Inspire Someone Today.
Thank you so much. It is creating ripples of inspiration by talking to people like you.
Hopefully, I can do my bit. Inspire at least one of your listeners, if not many more.
Sure. Founder CEO of Harappa, a tech company. That's what you would love to call yourself as. Is in the business of restacking the education space. So what's it like being a founder and CEO? What is the learnings? What's the perks? And what are the sleepless nights?
I like that classification of learnings, perks, and sleepless nights. It's such an immersive journey that it's difficult to be profound and pithy about it in a few sentences. I also came into entrepreneurship having been a journalist who was covering entrepreneurship and being the editor of a magazine and, writing 80 to 90 pages every month on entrepreneurship. So I thought I knew a lot of what it takes to build a business and, what entrepreneurship is like. And, my husband's also an entrepreneur and runs 2 companies. So I felt like, I was going in much more prepared than a lot of other people are. And yet I have to tell you, Shrikant, that I've written so much about the highs and lows of entrepreneurship, the shifting moods. In one day, you go through multiple emotions and they're so contrasting. And, you get it intellectually, but it is actually really like that. You live a very, very high stimulus life. You're constantly getting stimulus, both harsh, negative, positive, on a daily basis. So you're very cognitively, emotionally charged and engaged. And obviously that being that charged and engaged also takes a lot out of you. So it's a multicolored, technicolor, super immersive journey. It's like, going through a roller coaster ride with technicolor screens around you. That's how I'd like to describe it. Learnings. I think my biggest learning has been, you have to balance the opposite ends of a spectrum, of many spectrums, to, I think, be an effective founder and a CEO. So one, you have to zoom in, like it's called ZIZO, zoom in and zoom out. While you care about the tiniest detail, whether it comes to, your performance management system or your first collateral for a product that is going out, or the way that you conduct an interview or whatever it is, it's like in the moment you give that all it takes, and you're the pursuit of excellence or whatever that you have. Yet you also have to not worry about the details at all and think big and imagine 3 years out, 5 years out. So there's ZIZO. So that's one on a time base that, you have to manage both. The second is you have to manage both curiosity and execution. You can't just let your mind wander. You actually have to go and do the work. And I think that's a real, people don't realize that you actually have to get your hands dirty and do the work. It's very of the soil and it's very hands on, as well as it's like, in the clouds and your mind going everywhere and all over and guided by curiosity. So I think there's several, what I found is it's incredible that on most parameters of success as a founder and entrepreneur, you're supposed to straddle both ends of the spectrum together, So I think that's been my biggest learning. Second biggest learning has been emotional self-regulation. I was talking about how, emotionally charged and cognitively charged this journey is. And you really have to, stay in charge and teach yourself how to not get overly swayed. You can have moments of being touched and moments of frustration, but that, you can't let either the joy or the pride, lead you to hubris and arrogance. Neither can you take the setbacks and whatever and chip away at your confidence at extreme. So I think your emotional self-regulation, it happens multiple times a day that you have to sort of center yourself emotionally, because you could be having one very difficult conversation with a team member on performance. The next conversation, you're on a show like this where you're supposed to inspire someone. Third conversation, you'll go in the evening. Today is a board meeting. So just the variety of, you have to find the sur or the tal of the emotion that conversation requires of you and who you need to be in that conversation. That emotional self-regulation is very challenging, yet I think meaningful work. And most of one's personal growth as being a founder and CEO comes from actually that, navigating that landscape. So that those are my two big learnings.
Those are great articulations right out there. Is it extremes? Does entrepreneurship bring in those traits in you to balance those extremes, or do you prepare yourself to manage those kind of extremes?
This is one of those things that yes, you can. Like I was very intellectually prepared. The know-how of all of this journey. I've written articles on the psychological burden of entrepreneurship, and founders. I used to write a column for Mint called "Surviving Startups." So, however much you're prepared, when you actually go through the experience, you have to learn your survival kit or your Thrive framework for yourself. What entrepreneurship does, and that's where the why of why you want to be a founder and CEO, you talked about its glamour and things like that. It's not glamorous on an everyday basis. Many hours of the day are just very challenging and very difficult. And I think it makes it worth it, and is when you know why you're doing it. It feels tough, but it's meaningful and tough. And I think that entrepreneurship gives you. And I think that the meaning just is so high and so deeply felt, and you have so much conviction on, why you're doing this for yourself and for your company. It makes everything else possible. So one, just being in the arena, being on the dance floor. And second, just having your why very clear. I think both of those naturally just force you to develop how you manage extremes or whatever else.
Nice. And in many ways, the space that you are in and what has happened to the world over the last 2 years is kind of a concatenation of sorts, right? So the online education has been forced, particularly for the masses in India, right? Where we have to kind of upskill such a huge population. Online education is in a way boon for a lot of our countrymen. So how do you see this space for the next, say, 3 to 5 years time period?
I think it's a civilizational change that we're going through when it comes to learning and education. I think what COVID has done for many industries, I think, and these trends were afoot in any case, but I think it accelerated them beyond anyone's imagination. He's almost like put all of us on a time machine and say, here you go, 7 years later, what education will be. And if you think about it, it's unprecedented that every education administrator, every teacher or faculty, every principal, every parent, every student in the world, of whatever age and whatever kind of formal higher education or formal school education, has now experienced online learning in a condensed period of 18 to 20 months, right? Just that learning that we have, and just people's experiences of it, the feedback loop of so many people having experienced a new way of learning, a new way of delivering learning, a new way of planning for learning is, I think, very, very powerful information for educators like me and people who are building learning companies like to build out of, right? So I think we've entered an intense and immensely exciting phase of innovation in learning and education. I think this format of a sage or a guru or a teacher saying that and the rest of the students being captive on this in their seats has gone on for too long. So I think the intensity of innovations and the immense exciting of innovation, I think, is going to be very, very powerful for learners. I think it's actually a great time in the world to be a learner, because just the varieties of formats and options that learners at whatever age will have to truly discover and find their strengths and build the skills that are most important for them at that time, I think is a very, very powerful. You'll curate a learning path. So, for example, if I'm a 28-year-old somebody working in some company in Hyderabad or Bangalore or Delhi, I might have a technical skill of data science, for example, right? And I might have studied metallurgical engineering in my engineering degree, and then joined something and then have now found myself interested in data science. I can maybe take 6 months off and do a data science course. But as I'm also, that's one format of learning, and that could be online, and I could learn data science from the exciting entrepreneurs or faculty across the world. But what if I also want to become better at my personal finance? That, I want to live a much more deliberately and financially prudent life. For that, I'm not going to take 6 months off my job. I will do a 6-hour course online on what if I want to improve my speaking skills? Because now, from a data science person, I feel like I want to be a manager, and that's the trajectory in my profession. Again, you're not going to leave everything. So I think this continuous people coming in and going out, exploring and curating a learning journey, which does not stop at 22 and 23, because, we don't stop learning at 22 and 23. And the world demands many more skills from us and puts us in many more situations. I think this concept of a lifelong learning, this ability and autonomy, and to choose from a variety of formats and types of learning that learners have, is truly mind-boggling. That's going to happen. And my last urge for people who've been underwhelmed or disillusioned or disappointed by the online learning experience as parents, or as students themselves in schools and colleges over the last 18 months, my appeal to them is always that I say that, listen, we're in the black and white era of, what the black and white era of television was, and that's the stage we're at in online learning. It's going to improve. We will get to IMAX 4D, and we'll get to IMAX 4D faster than black and white television got to IMAX 4D as a viewing experience, because just how many of us are experiencing it. It's not perfect, of course. Please also have some empathy for your teachers and faculty who, without being trained at all on online learning, overnight had to manage, in some way. And thank God for the ability to do something at least, right? But it will get much better, and will get much better, much faster than I think many of us imagine.
That's a wonderful analogy as well. So we are talking to Shreyasi Singh. We spoke about entrepreneurship. We spoke about online education. Why are we doing all of it? Is because she is one of the forefront founders of an happening online education space based out of India called as Harappa. So before we get into the genesis of Harappa and what instigated Trace and team to get started with that, Trace, I just wanted to bring to your attention a very interesting tweet I read a couple of days back from Paul Graham, which basically said, student debt is higher than ever. At the same time, educating oneself is easier than ever. On that note, let me bring you on to what's Harappa, the genesis of Harappa, and how did this all happen?
Oh, I love that quote, and it's so true. Origin stories are very messy and difficult to explain. But Broadly, I think I would say three things happened for us to have started to work on Harappa. One was, of course, the relationship and dynamic between me and my co-founder, Pramath. Pramath is sort of a pioneering higher educationist in India and has been very instrumental in setting up two of India's best private sector learning institutions, such as the Indian School of Business and Ashoka University. Both of was founding dean of one and one of the founders and trustees of the other. He was my boss when I was editor of Inc. He was my publisher. We also used to run a media company then. And so I think our shared ambitions of to build something, first our shared value system and our commitment to do something together is one reason that, why both of us started to think about it. I think the second reason is that this is such a massive problem. I think, Harappa actually focuses on cognitive, social, and behavioral skills as its curriculum. And, these skills are just very massively underaddressed in formal education systems. These are skills of how to reason, how to think critically, how to negotiate, how to influence, how to look inwards, how to deal with setback, how to nurture, how to foster grit, how to build resilience, right? Now, some of these topics have started to become a little bit more, discussed in the last 2 or 3 years, but even 3.5 years back when we started to think of Harappa, they're still not in formal education systems with the way that they need to be. So we felt like that scale of the problem, that such critical skills which actually influence professional success, personal growth, as well as the productivity and efficiency of teams and companies is completely missing from formal education systems, was the second reason for us to have started to do this. The third reason, sort of as a subset of the second, is one, of course, you see a large problem and you feel like, you have the solutions. And that as founders, we feel like we have a personal and authentic right to, or are the right fit. There's something called the founder product fit as well, right? I mean, people keep talking about product market fit, that we feel like, we've lived very diverse and serendipitous careers. And really, it is these skills that I think for both me and Pramath have been instrumental in our success. So I think that deep conviction and feel like we can do this better than others, and it is an important thing to do. I think those three things combined is where we started to think of, building her.
So great value prop out there. For an listener here, so how does Harappa differentiate from the other MOOC platforms?
So one, we're not a MOOC, and I think because we're sort of in that sense a second generation of online learning companies, I think we, just to refer back to your tweet on Paul Graham again, we've realized that mere access to content is not enough for people to truly learn. I keep saying learning is tough. It's cognitively challenging. It takes effort. We expect things to be easy. Well, the human mind doesn't work like that. And we genuinely don't pick up skills and learn in that manner. So Harappa in one way differs from the massive online open courses is because we don't leave people at just access to content, however high quality that content is, which is challenging enough on its own to build. We really take on custodianship. And I think we have a lot of empathy for our learners to understand that in some ways we're all first generation online learners, and new systems and new categories do need people to be handheld through them, that you have to there's almost a meta skill about how to learn online that you have to teach your learners before they can use that skill to learn physics or chemistry or negotiation skills or leadership skills or whatever. And I think so we differ in that we really focus on that, fostering that motivation, breaking the inertia, and really hand-holding people through learning, and which is why our completion and engagement numbers are 1.5 miles above most other online learning players, because we focus so much on more than access to content, which is this engagement less. I think that's one way in which we differ. I think second, given that we're an Indian company and we started a business in India, most of the other online learning companies are global biggies, or essentially American companies, and the curriculum and their worldview and their perspective is also very American. And I think we felt like online can anyway be an alienating and isolating medium. And especially for adults learn because the context is rich. I think we forget about education that education is not as much about content as it is about context. Bringing the cultural context and the lived wisdom of the faculty who also operate in India is another big way in which we differ. Those two things are, I think, pretty foundational to our differentiation. And third, I would say, is we're the only online learning company which has sort of the ambitions of scale as we do, which focuses only on cognitive, social, and behavioral skills. Most of the others focus much more on the functional and technical skills of the workplace and of modern careers, whether it's data science, AI, ML, coding, programming, so on and so forth. Most of the other K-12 edtech players in India only focus on maths and science and exam success in maths and science. And the largest edtech players in India, actually, I say they all only focus on exam tech, which is cracking the JEE or cracking the NEET or cracking the UPSC, right? In that sense, we differ completely from them in our objectives as well as our curriculum.
So that's how you redefine your pedagogy for this kind of a learning.
Yes.
Focus on the cognitive skills, focus on the human emotional skills to make learning a lot more successful than what it is.
I keep saying that even if you go and cross that exam, by the time you're 25, 26, you'll start feeling the need to, hey, how do I work with others? How do I understand myself, right? So I think our pedagogy is also changed and defined because we work with adults. And adults learn very differently from younger students, right? And I think that our pedagogy is also shaped from adults. So I think that also makes a big difference.
Excellent. I think related to this, it would be amiss if we don't touch upon this element in the conversation, which is about career transition. And no better than you to talk about career transition because you started off as a journalist, did your stint with journalism, then moved into this particular area of being, and you're an author, a journalist, an author, founder, CEO, right? Couldn't have asked for this. Just tell us, how did this roadmap happen? And at every career trajectory, what were those decision points?
So one, in hindsight, when things work out as they seem to be working out for me, one feels very intelligent having made those decisions. But of course, all dots connect looking backwards. They don't connect looking forward, right? You have to, first collect the dots so that you can connect them later. I think 3 or 4 really true transition points. And yes, I think my professional journey really confuses my family, friends, and even other professionals who are looking like, how is she doing this? And I keep saying like I'm a non-techie, non-MBA founder, CEO of an online learning business, right?
Of a tech company.
Of a tech company and an online learning business. So I think I do confuse and puzzle a lot of people. And it's fun to see, sort of that look of like, how is she doing this in lots of people's eyes? Because people have a sort of a set image of, a linearity of how you collect experiences and which helps you set you up for your next stage. I think a couple of key decisions. One was to obviously, I started even in my journalism career, I started very early on in television. And I think leaving television to work in print was obviously one big decision. But the one big career transition point was leaving journalism and that decision. And I think that decision at that point, which is I think 2014, 15 now, I guess 2015 is when I finally took it, is because I had discovered that actually I had many more skills than a journalism career would ever be able to use because it has a certain, so that was one, important clarity that I got. The second important reality actually was that the media industry and the journalism industry itself has stagnated, has died. There are not that many role models who you want to be, and you still have another 30 years of a career ahead of you, right? So if you're truly ambitious, and that's something that, in my book, you mentioned the book, The Wealth Wallas that I'd written, one of the entrepreneurs, highly successful entrepreneurs I'd interviewed for the book, he told me something that has always stuck to me and is advice that I offer other people, is you have to pick 70% of your career growth is also about being in an industry which is growing. Because however good you are in an industry which is journalism has some of the smartest, most well-read people with a great knowledge and engagement with the world, but the industry itself is not growing. So however good you are, whether it's salary increment, whether it's reach or whatever, you will be limited by the realities of the industry. So always pick. So I think that was something that had stuck with me as well. And the third was sort of the experience of having written on entrepreneurship so much. I think I was really inspired by obviously all the entrepreneurs that I would routinely meet, and said that, hey, you're smart. If you're doing this, maybe I could do this too. So I think that, trying to find a space which was had much more potential for growth, realizing my own strengths, and where they were not, and that they were not being used. And third, really also being inspired by what others had done were important reasons for me to have quit journalism. I didn't know even then. In fact, I was one of those people who would say I would never be an entrepreneur, because actually I love the diversity of my career. And as an employee, one of the biggest advantages you have is your autonomy. You can move much more easily than a founder can, right? Like I got married early, I had a child early, so I felt like I was already so highly committed on some very important aspects of my life. I like the fact that I could do a bunch of different things with my career. And so I was one of those people who would say never be an entrepreneur. But the career shifts I've always been very excited with. Second, you have to follow your curiosity. I think that's a really important point that, and sometimes I was listening to this podcast and I can't remember some academic researcher talking about it. Listen to your body say yes. Sometimes you just listen to a mind, but like what excites you, I keep also saying that, yeah, maybe this is not great advice or it doesn't sound good, but it's really worked for me, is really try and capture what you're envious of. And, when you see someone, do you value the fact that they have an autonomy in their career? Do you value the fact that they have status? Do you value the fact that they're well? What really makes you jealous? Those moments of jealousy as human beings that we all have. Really, what is the cause of it? Because I think your deepest aspirations are actually buried in that moments of jealousy. So I've really followed my curiosity. I've really tried to deconstruct my jealousy. And I think through that sort of started to build that, I like doing new things, right? And I want to constantly add new skills to my career. Now for modern careers, it's almost like, you stack up skills, right? You have a skill stack almost. So my skill stack, for example, is journalism, it's editorial proficiency, it's being author, it's being a women professional, because I've done so much research on that area. Now, of course, it's education. It's also technology and product. And, that my stack will not look like your stack. And that's what you become unique because your stack is so unique. And I think I've started to think about my career and the transitions is to say with every transition, what is that one stack that I've added to my full stack model?
Excellent. Great inputs there. One is the stacking bit of it and deconstructing your jealousy.
Yeah, very useful. It sounds kind of not a very pleasant activity, but trust me, gives you lots of clues.
Yeah, in a positive way, deconstructing your jealousy in a positive way, right?
Yes.
So we are not off on your career transition. I think one thing that you have mentioned a couple of times during the course of this conversation and also on your interviews is the impact you have had working at Inc. India. So tell us a bit about it. Any interesting stories, anecdotes that shaped the person that you are or that made you to take certain decisions the way you took those decisions?
Yeah, I think Inc. was so instrumental in instilling ambition. I think its greatest impact on my life is really that. And, and again, I studied history in college. And in some ways, as a editor of an entrepreneurship magazine, you're constantly studying the history of how companies get built. So I'm endlessly fascinated by the behind the scenes and the history and the journey of big things. So whether it's movies, right? I'd actually love watching interviews with scriptwriters and directors on what was that thought process? I love the process of why how creators think, and why I love the thought process of, I love like business biographies and things like that, because there's a historical element, and this is how, your interests and curiosities. So I think Ink gave me a chance to do all of that. The second most important thing that Ink certainly gave me is because if you're bringing out 80, 90 pages of content on a topic like entrepreneurship. So in one issue, there are 4 interviews with an entrepreneur. There's a 5-pager on branding for startups or branding as a whatever. There is a 3-pager on how founders and time productivity. I feel like just all of that knowledge is so useful to me right now. And I think my introduction to, and I hopefully think Harappa is ahead on some things, because, whether it's culture, whether it's articulating your vision, whether it's having a very deliberate strategy on your brand. I think those are things that the functional knowledge of running a business, I feel like I got with Ink. It was almost like a PhD in entrepreneurship in some ways, as I call it. So of course, that's very, very useful right now. And I think I have more gratitude for my Ink journey now as a founder and CEO, because I'm using it obviously much more. I don't know if I had that same gratitude and understanding of the impact of that journey 2-3 years back, but now it's like really hits home every day. And that's sort of also my advice to people is, hey, immediately the impact of a stint that you had is not going to be clear to you the time you're having, the time you're living it, or even immediately after. But it can, surface and really influence something you are doing later as well.
That's the connecting the dot backward moment.
Yes, it is. It truly is.
Great. So we will take a detour. So we will get to see the other side of Shreyasi. So we are slipping into what is called as the power of 3 round. So I'll ask you a set of questions for which you have 3 responses for each of the questions. So if you are ready, we'll slip into the power of 3 round.
All ready.
Wonderful. So we are in the power of 3 round. The first question in the power of 3 round, Shreyasi, is 3 signature courses to look out for on Harappa.
Leading self, speaking effectively, and leading others.
3 personalities you would like to onboard as Harappa facilitators.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she's a Nigerian author, my favorite. Jacqueline Novogratz, she's the founder of the Acumen Fund. And third, Monica Holland, she's a personal finance expert in India.
Great going. 3 influencers from whom Shreyasi got influenced.
I don't know about influencers, but I'm very influenced by, the celebrities or whatever. Reese Witherspoon, who's a actor in Hollywood and also a producer. I'm quite influenced by her. I like her entrepreneurial journey and morphing from a whatever. So that for sure. We have to be current, like right now, or from history.
They can be from Harappa history also.
Atticus Finch is my favorite fictional character from the book To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch was the protagonist's father and a lawyer. And, I think he's my sort of all-time inspiring figures for sure. And third, Arundhati Ghosh. She used to be an Indian Foreign Service officer. And the way that she would speak, and I think this was my formative years, in school is when I discovered a speech of hers. It always struck, her life always struck out at me. So I think those 3 people have one fictional and 2 real.
3 big, hairy, audacious goals that Shreyasi has set for herself for the next decade.
Oh, wow. Next decade. Okay. I don't think in decades. I think in 3 years. I think in power of 3 is something I believe in. So I think in 3 years. But if I had to do a decade, of course, one would certainly be linked to Harappa, which is, of course, to make it into this force for learning the right skills and really helping many learners, millions of learners learn the right skills. And also as a corporate citizen, to be a brand that stands for something positive in the world. I think very important how each one of us shows up as a citizen, and the company is a citizen as well. So it does what it has to do, which is, it will do its product whatever that product is. But I think there's a second responsibility to be a brand and be an entity that inspires others who get connected with it, right? I think that's a very, very clear, big, hairy, audacious goal. The second big, hairy, audacious goal is, of course, around my son. And just, he's just got into his teens. And I think the next 7-8 years is a very formative, foundational phase of his life. To so be a useful, enabling wind beneath his wings is, of course, my second big, hairy, audacious goal. I don't know if it's a hairy and audacious goal. Every parent thinks like this, but it's an important commitment and something that I'm looking forward to. And third would be continue to dream more big, hairy, audacious goals without losing myself. I think that's really important. I feel like there's a lot more that I want to do on many more spheres. But while being me and not letting either the disappointments or the successes change me fundamentally as a person, while of course, you refine. So I think that is life's work, to be able to discover your spheres of impact that you want to have and also be true to yourself.
Superb. 3 trends that you are looking out in the education space over the years.
So cohort-based blended learning journeys, how to scale those. I think the real power of online learning can be truly manifested by these cohort-based courses and blended learning journeys. I think genuinely global cohorts, people learning in global cohorts, and a curriculum innovation where we actually focus on the right skills that matter. And it's not stop, but just make much more sanity of this rank credentialing business, which is again your Paul Graham quote about student debt and useless degrees and people going through 16 years of education and then being told they don't know anything and have no skills.
It's not adequate enough.
Yeah. So I think it's tragic. Those 3 trends about curriculum innovation, to start with the bottom, truly globally connected cohorts and scaling cohort-based blended learning journeys are the 3 trends that I'm watching.
Great, Shreyasi. That was the power of 3 round. Thank you so much for being a sport. The heart of this conversation is about entrepreneurship, and you are one at it. So some queries around the entrepreneurial journey that you have had. What are the challenges of being an entrepreneur? You did talk about initially what you kind of go through day in, day out, the paradoxes of emotions that you kind of go through. For a lot of the listeners listening here, if they were to kind of look at it aspiring to be an entrepreneur, what would be your piece of advice to them as wanting to be an entrepreneur?
So I think hiring, I'm going to be trying to be tactical and sort of an everyday and not give you philosophical. So I think hiring and people, like just people, everything to do with people, getting the right people, finding the right people for the right role, convincing them to join you, then being able to motivate them, cherish them, but also being able to push them, also being able to give them development feedback, yet keeping them engaged. I think people is one of the toughest challenges. And there's a entire sort of, spectrum of activities around people. And each one of them is a very challenging skill and a mindset to constantly navigate through if you're an entrepreneur. That's one, of course. Second is, how are you going to capitalize this business, and which has so many? Is it going to be bootstrap? Is it going to be funded? You know that there are some realities of both, and you can't want to have a funded company but behave like then have sort of be happy with bootstrap company revenue growth, right? So I think you call into it and what suits you, what's right for your business, what's right. So to really understanding sort of how, the financial model of both how the company is financed, as well as, really how financial metrics move is a big challenge, and one that one has to almost constantly stay at and will have to take decisions on. And third is, like I said, both, like you have to be a learning machine, like you have to learn very. So both discipline and learnability, I think from a two, what other things would be are challenges to there's no time to slack.
No time to slack. So I'm sure you're very familiar with this phrase that will always be used with you, which is women CEO and women founder. Does that come with a bouquet of roses, or is it a stem of thorns?
Wow, you're being very dramatic. I think if you do well, it is a bouquet of roses. People do appreciate. One has to understand. I don't shy away like a lot of people who say, "Hey, why are you calling me a woman CEO and not just a CEO?" And of course, through the conversation you've called me. So I think that we're in that phase where you're trying to right the balance, and for that, then the people who are a woman CEO or whatever will have to own that identity to be able to make a difference. So in that sense, it doesn't make me feel like, oh, anybody is dismissing my whatever. In fact, I feel like we used to call out within Harappa, people say, I'm the 2%, the only 2% of women CEOs. So, there are lots of slides that I have. It starts with, and there's this sort of pose of me as a sort of a warrior pose. And, we say I'm the 2%, and we link to the data of saying only 2% of women CEOs. I think I've realized that it's a bouquet of roses, but more than bouquet of roses, a great sense of responsibility, which I don't take, like I'm very mindful of. You are watched more. You're also watched. There are also more people want you to succeed. And that's maybe the bouquet of roses or the privileges, because you can see the young women or the women in your teams or the women around you. I think your success means a lot to them. And when they see you being, bold and dynamic or whatever it is that, whatever qualities that any CEO is expected to bring or ends up bringing because of the nature of the job, it means a lot to them. So I think more than either the stem of thorns or bouquet of responsibility, it's a crown of responsibilities for sure. I keep saying, if given a chance, make the change. So I now can't run a company which will have skewed gender dynamic, right? So, we constantly watch gender data, whether it's on pay, whether it's on composition. Like one of the things I'm having sleepless nights about right now is so challenging and difficult to find CXOs who are women in other fields as we're adding, right? And it just gives me that, we are 50% men, 50% women in most parts of the business and the hierarchy. And it's only a director and VP plus where that ratio is just, even for someone like me who is so obsessed about this, has been so difficult to curate. But like I said, a crown of responsibilities. I'm not a victim. I don't think of it as a victim mindset at all. So yes, of course, I think stereotypes, biases, the way sometimes people react to you, all of that is there. I don't also want to run away from the reality of it, right? But I never think of it as a victim mindset. But I do feel very responsible to earn the right to be a role model for women and men. Hopefully, as a woman CEO, it's an important thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's a sense of responsibility that you have for your people and, like you said, the community at large as well. I think one other thing that is very intriguing in my mind, I anyways wanted to ask you this particular question, was the business that you are in, providing online education to a lot of the masses out there. But it's also about great teamwork. You have to bring in technocrats, you got to bring in captains from the industry. You need to kind of bring in educators from top notch schools, academia, things like that. So how do you foster teamwork where these individuals are not necessarily part of your team, but still part of your team?
Absolutely. It's a civilization, right? So of course they're a part of it. Not everybody has to work at Harappa full time to truly be part of the Harappa team. I agree with you. I think that's so well said that you said. For a business like this, when you know that you have to bring lots of people together and lots of ideas together, you have to be a people liker. I think I almost now think that the world is people keep saying the world is divided into people who do this, people who do this. I do feel like people are divided sometimes into people who like people and people who are okay with people or sort of whatever. I actually like people, right? Like I get, so I think that certainly helps. And there's a genuine joy in being able to have an amazing conversation. Like I think we thrive and live on some of that at Harappa. And I personally do as well. I feel this great power is not about some mindless joy. I think there's great power in having a meaningful conversation that can set off a trigger of activities and events. So I think that one is very excited by. Second, you have to be honest in your motivations and articulate your motivations to people if you really want collaborators from across. How do you build that trust? And I think that trust does get built when you tell people why you want to do that. The second is transfer of enthusiasm and energy. And that's this whole vision thing, right? Like, I talk about Harappa, the power of this curriculum, the power of a 20-year-old who otherwise would not have been introduced to some of our leadership curriculum because they can't go to a CXO program till 20 years later. And how many people go through a amazing leadership CXO program, but that curriculum being broad-based and brought to people at 20, 21, 24. You're just power. That's, I think, you have to be able to transfer your conviction and your energy and your enthusiasm. And then everybody is looking for fun things to do is my other discovery. There, people are willing to engage with you. You'll find your tribe.
You'll find your tribe, transfer of conviction. And lastly, around the entrepreneurial journey is this whole pressure of valuation, IPO, want to hit big, scaling, right? So how do you do the balancing act of constantly scaling, constantly kind of playing to what the market is wanting you to do, at the same time keeping the brand quality at the forefront of everything?
Yeah, no, that's a really tough one, especially in, something like edtech, which is overvalued. And, I'm an ambitious person. I do think that it takes so much hard work to do anything small. You might as well do something big. And I do own my ambition. So you are constantly, that's the human whatever, you're constantly benchmarking yourself against others, right? And neither is that healthy to do constantly, but you can't also be an ostrich with your head in the sand. I don't think that as an entrepreneur, you have that luxury also, and shouldn't have. I think you need to know what's happening around you. But to get completely swayed by it and not appreciate, each company has its own history, a moment in time. Almost no two companies have a similar trajectory. And I think understanding that, this is sort of the history of entrepreneurs, this is your historical readings will tell you that, there is something unique and you can't try and mirror anybody else's journey. But that's a constant conversation you have to have with yourself so that, you are not swayed to start doing something just because you feel like, three companies are working because of that. You will also not be able to do it, especially for us, for my co-founder and I, for him, it's sort of his third or fourth entrepreneurial journey. For me, it's a second career that I started also in my late 30s. I don't think we're also fully formed individuals by this stage, right? We're not like 25-year-old founders, but I can imagine that it's so easy to get swayed. It is very difficult and that's what to find, like, to see who who you are, what your business needs and what you have to do while being aware of the noise, but not getting lost in it.
Well, those are some profound Harappan insights. Shreyasi, thank you so much for sharing everything that you had to share with us. This show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. If there is an Inspire Someone Today message for all the listeners out here, what is Shreyasi's and Harappa's Inspire Someone Today message?
I'll use my favorite Latin phrase, which has inspired me always to stay on the journey of doing anything tough and meaningful because it takes time. It's a phrase called graditum ferociter. It means step by step ferociously. And I think that's my stay at it, do everything and sort of be ferocious in your ambitions.
Thank you for joining us today, Shreyasi.
My pleasure, Shrikant. What a lovely conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what to listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates.
This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.